Imagine waking up completely naked in the middle of the Australian Outback, with no memory of how you got there, no water, no food, and no hope of rescue. This is exactly what happened to Ricky Megee, a 35-year-old man from Brisbane, whose story of survival defies every limit of human endurance. What you're about to hear will make you question everything you thought you knew about the will to live. This is a story so extreme, so shocking, that even the authorities didn't believe it when Ricky was finally found. But the evidence was undeniable. Stay with us as we uncover the most incredible survival story ever documented in the Australian Outback. To understand how Ricky Megee survived the impossible, we need to go back to where it all began. Richard Megee was born in the rural town of Gippsland, Victoria, in 1971, into what seemed like an ordinary Australian family. But behind closed doors, young Ricky's childhood was anything but normal. His father, a man who should have been his protector and role model, was battling demons that would ultimately destroy their family. When Ricky was just 12 years old, his world collapsed. His father, unable to cope with his internal struggles, made the devastating decision to take his own life. The suicide left an indelible mark on young Ricky's soul. The boy who once dreamed of playing cricket in the backyard with his dad was now left to navigate the complexities of adolescence, without a father figure, carrying the weight of questions that would never have answers. The family moved to Melbourne, hoping for a fresh start, but the trauma followed them like a shadow. Ricky's mother did her best to hold the family together, but the financial and emotional strain was overwhelming. Ricky learned early that life could be cruel and unpredictable. This harsh lesson would prove crucial decades later in the unforgiving Australian desert. As a teenager, Ricky struggled to find his place in the world. He was a good kid, but the loss of his father had created a void that he tried to fill in various ways. He wasn't particularly academic, but he had something more valuable: an incredible determination to survive whatever life threw at him. This resilience, forged in the fires of childhood trauma, would become his greatest asset. By his 20s, Ricky had tried his hand at numerous jobs across Australia. He worked as a carpet salesman in Brisbane, where his natural charm and persistence made him surprisingly successful. But the conventional life never quite suited him. He craved adventure, something that would make him feel alive again. So he tried commercial fishing, spending months on prawning boats off the Queensland coast, battling rough seas and dangerous conditions that would have intimidated most people. Later, he worked as a nightclub bouncer in Brisbane's entertainment district, dealing with intoxicated patrons and potentially violent situations on a nightly basis. He also trained as an electrician, learning skills that required precision and problem-solving abilities. Each job taught him something different about survival, about reading people, about staying calm under pressure. Little did he know that all these experiences were preparing him for the ultimate test of his life. By 2006, at 35 years old, Ricky was living in Brisbane, single and always looking for the next opportunity. He was the kind of person who would take risks that others wouldn't dare consider. Friends described him as fearless, sometimes to a fault. He had a reputation for being able to handle himself in tough situations, but nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared him for what was about to happen. January 2006 was scorching hot in Brisbane, even by Australian standards. The city was sweltering under a relentless summer heat that seemed to drain the energy from everyone. Ricky Megee was between jobs again, spending his evenings at local pubs, nursing beers and keeping his ears open for work opportunities. Money was tight and he was getting desperate for his next gig. It was on one of these sweltering nights that Ricky found himself at a pub in inner Brisbane, where the air conditioning was broken and the beer was the only thing keeping the patrons cool. That's when he was approached by three men who would change his life forever. They seemed friendly enough, the kind of rough-around-the-edges guys you'd expect to find in a working-class pub. They struck up a conversation with Ricky, buying him drinks and showing genuine interest in his work experience. One of the men, who appeared to be the leader of the group, had an intriguing proposition. He claimed to have a job opportunity in Port Hedland, Western Australia. Good money for someone with Ricky's diverse skill set. The work involved some kind of maintenance job at a mining operation, nothing too specific, But the pay was attractive enough to get Ricky's attention. For a man who had been struggling financially, it seemed like the answer to his prayers. The men were persuasive. They painted a picture of easy money and adventure in the remote mining town. They even offered to provide transportation, claiming they were heading that way anyway. Ricky's instinct should have warned him. Legitimate job offers don't usually come from strangers in pubs late at night. But desperation has a way of clouding judgment, and the promise of steady income was too tempting to ignore. After several more drinks, the men suggested they leave immediately. They had a vehicle outside, they said, and the sooner they got on the road, the sooner Ricky could start earning money. Looking back, this was the moment when everything went wrong, but at the time, fueled by alcohol and hope, Ricky made the fateful decision to go with them. What happened next remains largely a mystery, even to Ricky himself. He remembers getting into their vehicle, a large four-wheel drive that seemed appropriate for the long journey ahead. He recalls the conversation continuing as they drove through the Brisbane suburbs and onto the highway heading west. But somewhere along the way, something was terribly wrong. Ricky's next clear memory is fragments of consciousness, feeling dizzy, nauseous, and increasingly disoriented. The men's voices seemed to be coming from far away, even though they were sitting right next to him. His vision was blurring, and he was struggling to form coherent thoughts. It became clear that his drink had been spiked with some kind of drug, possibly Rohypnol or another powerful sedative. The rest of that night is lost to pharmaceutical-induced blackness. Ricky would never know exactly what his captors did to him during those missing hours, but the evidence suggests they robbed him of everything he had: his wallet, his identification, his clothes, even his shoes. More importantly, they stole something far more valuable. They took away his chance of survival by abandoning him in one of the most inhospitable places on Earth. What do you think so far? Are you starting to understand the magnitude of what Ricky was about to face? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, because what comes next will test every limit of human endurance. When Ricky Megee regained consciousness, the sun was already high in the sky, beating down mercilessly on his naked body. The first sensation wasn't the heat. It was the confusion. He was lying face down in red dirt, completely disoriented, with a splitting headache that felt like his skull was being crushed in a vice. As consciousness slowly returned, the horrible reality of his situation began to dawn on him. He was completely naked, not a stitch of clothing, not even underwear. His body was already showing signs of severe dehydration and sunburn. Looking around, all he could see in every direction was the endless expanse of the Australian Outback. Red dirt, sparse vegetation, and a horizon that seemed to mock any hope of civilization. There were no roads, no buildings, no signs of human presence whatsoever. The first few hours were spent in disbelief. Surely this was a nightmare, or some kind of cruel joke that would end soon. But as the sun climbed higher and the temperature soared past 40 degrees Celsius, reality set in with crushing force. He had been drugged, robbed, and abandoned to die in one of the most remote and unforgiving environments on the planet. The immediate priorities were shelter and water. Without clothes, his skin was already blistering under the intense UV radiation. Ricky quickly realized that staying in the open during the day would kill him within hours. Using his hands, he began digging a shallow depression under the only tree he could find, a scraggly bush that provided minimal shade, but was better than nothing. Water was an even more critical concern. The human body can survive weeks without food, but only days without water, especially in extreme heat. Ricky began searching desperately for any source of moisture. He tried chewing on leaves and bark, hoping to extract some liquid, but the vegetation was as dry as paper. He attempted to collect morning dew, but in the arid climate, there was barely enough to wet his lips. It was on the third day that Ricky faced his first impossible decision. Dehydration was setting in rapidly. His tongue was swollen, his lips were cracked and bleeding, and his urine had turned dark amber. That's when survival instinct overrode social conditioning, and he made the choice that would keep him alive. He began drinking his own urine. The first time was the hardest. Everything in his civilized mind rebelled against it, but his body was shutting down, and he knew that his own waste was the only liquid available. It was warm, salty, and revolting, but it contained precious water that his kidneys had not yet processed. This disgusting but life-saving practice would become a daily ritual for the next 2 months. Food presented another horrific challenge. By the 5th day, hunger was becoming unbearable. Ricky had always been a meat and potatoes kind of guy, but the Outback offered no such luxuries. Instead, he was forced to consider options that would have made him sick just days earlier. He began eating anything that moved: ants, beetles, grasshoppers, even spiders. The first time he caught a grasshopper and put it in his mouth, he vomited immediately. But starvation has a way of changing perspective. Soon, he was actively hunting insects, learning which ones were edible and which might be poisonous. He discovered that ants had a slightly sour taste, beetles were crunchy but nutritious, and grasshoppers became almost palatable when he was hungry enough. But even insects were scarce in this barren landscape. Ricky had to expand his diet further. He began eating frogs when he could catch them near the rare puddles of stagnant water. He consumed lizards, stripping away the skin and eating the raw flesh. Most disturbingly, he was forced to eat leeches, slimy, blood-sucking parasites that he found in muddy water sources. Thank you so much for staying with us this far through Ricky's incredible story. I know these details are difficult to hear, but they show the extraordinary lengths a human being will go to survive. The best part of this story is still coming, so please don't go anywhere. As the days turned into weeks, Ricky Megee's body began to undergo a horrifying transformation. The man who had once been a solid, well-built Australian was literally wasting away before his own eyes. His weight, which had been around 85 kilograms when he was abandoned, began dropping at an alarming rate. Every morning when he woke up, he could feel his body consuming itself to stay alive. The physical changes were devastating. His muscles, deprived of proper nutrition, began to atrophy. His arms and legs became skeletal, with skin hanging loose where flesh used to be. His face became gaunt and hollow, his cheekbones protruding sharply, and his eyes sinking deep into their sockets. By the 4th week, he looked like a walking corpse, a shadow of the man he had once been. But the mental challenges were even worse than the physical ones. Isolation in the Outback does things to the human mind that are almost impossible to describe. With no human contact, no stimulation, and the constant stress of survival, Ricky began to experience hallucinations. He would see mirages of rescue helicopters that turned out to be birds. He imagined hearing voices calling his name, only to realize it was the wind through the sparse vegetation. The loneliness was crushing. Humans are social creatures, and complete isolation can drive even the strongest person to the brink of madness. Ricky began talking to himself, having entire conversations with imaginary companions. He would argue with voices in his head, sometimes becoming so animated that he would gesture wildly at empty air. These weren't signs of insanity. They were his mind's desperate attempt to maintain some connection to humanity. Sleep became another enemy. During the scorching days, he would try to rest in whatever shade he could find, but the heat made real sleep impossible. At night, when temperatures dropped dramatically, he would shiver uncontrollably in his makeshift shelters. Without proper rest, his body couldn't recover from the daily ordeal of survival, creating a vicious cycle of deterioration. Finding water remained his daily obsession. He learned to read the landscape like a survival manual, looking for signs of moisture in this seemingly dead environment. He discovered that certain types of vegetation indicated underground water sources. He learned to dig with his bare hands, creating crude wells that sometimes yielded a few precious drops of muddy water. During rare rainstorms, Ricky would position himself to catch every drop possible. He would lie on his back with his mouth open, letting the rain fall directly onto his tongue. He learned to use large leaves as makeshift funnels, directing water into natural depressions and rocks. These moments of rainfall were like gifts from heaven, but they were few and far between. The constant search for food became increasingly desperate. As weeks passed, even insects became harder to find. Ricky was forced to expand his diet to include things that would horrify most people. He ate the eggs of birds when he could find nests. He consumed the larvae of various insects, digging them out of rotting logs and dead vegetation. He even resorted to eating his own hair and fingernails when nothing else was available. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of his ordeal was the gradual erosion of his humanity. Civilized behavior is largely dependent on having basic needs met. When those needs disappear, so do many of the social conventions that define us as human beings. Ricky found himself behaving more like a wild animal than a man, prowling for food, sleeping wherever he could find minimal shelter, and focusing solely on the next meal, the next drink of water, the next chance to survive another day. There were moments when giving up seemed like the merciful option. The physical pain, the mental anguish, and the hopelessness of his situation would sometimes overwhelm him completely. He would lie in the dirt, crying and begging for death to take him. But somehow, deep inside, the same resilience that had carried him through his father's suicide and years of hardship kept him fighting. Even when logic said there was no hope, his survival instinct refused to surrender. By the 7th week, Ricky had lost over 30 kilograms. His body was consuming its own organs to stay alive. His immune system was failing, leaving him vulnerable to infections and diseases. His mental state was deteriorating rapidly, with periods of lucidity interrupted by episodes of complete confusion and disorientation. By any reasonable measure, he should have been dead. On March 8, 2006, after 71 days of unimaginable suffering, a miracle occurred. A cattle station worker named Tom Hanbury was conducting routine fence repairs in a remote area of the Pilbara region when he spotted something that didn't belong in the landscape. At first glance, it looked like a dead animal, but as he got closer, he realized with shock that it was a human being. Barely. Ricky Megee was unconscious, lying in a small patch of shade, his body so emaciated that he was almost unrecognizable as human. His weight had dropped from 85 kilograms to just 45 kilograms. His skin was burned black by the sun, covered in cuts, scratches, and infected wounds. His hair had grown wild and matted, and his fingernails were long and broken from digging for water and food. Hanbury immediately called for emergency medical assistance. When the Royal Flying Doctor Service arrived, the medical team was stunned by what they found. In their experience with Outback rescues, they had never seen anyone survive such extreme conditions for so long. The doctor who first examined Ricky later said that he shouldn't have been alive. By all medical standards, his body should have shut down weeks earlier. The helicopter rushed Ricky to Port Hedland Hospital, where medical staff worked frantically to stabilize his condition. He was suffering from severe malnutrition, dehydration, kidney failure, and multiple infections. His body temperature was dangerously low, and his heart was struggling to pump blood through his weakened system. For the first 48 hours, doctors weren't sure if he would survive. But Ricky's incredible will to live, the same force that had kept him going for 71 days in hell, pulled him through the medical crisis. Slowly, over the course of several weeks, his body began to recover. He was fed through tubes initially, as his digestive system had to be gradually reintroduced to normal food. Physical therapy helped him regain the use of muscles that had nearly wasted away completely. However, as news of Ricky's survival spread, it was met with skepticism and controversy. The story seemed too incredible to be true. How could someone survive for over 2 months in one of the world's most hostile environments with no supplies, no shelter, and no clothes? Police investigators, insurance companies, and media outlets began questioning whether Ricky's account was accurate. Some suggested that he might have had help during his ordeal, perhaps accomplices who provided him with food and water periodically. Others theorized that he might have found an abandoned shelter or water source that he wasn't revealing. The most cynical observers accused him of fabricating the entire story for attention or potential financial gain. But the medical evidence was undeniable. The extreme weight loss, the specific types of malnutrition, the pattern of sun damage on his body, and the psychological effects of prolonged isolation all supported his account. Forensic experts who examined the site where he was found discovered evidence consistent with long-term survival activities. Crude shelters, digging sites for water, and traces of the insects and small animals he claimed to have eaten. More importantly, Ricky's story never changed. Despite intense questioning from police, media, and medical professionals, He consistently described the same sequence of events. His memory of being drugged and abandoned remained fuzzy, which was consistent with the effects of the substances likely used on him. But his detailed recollections of the survival techniques he employed, the hallucinations he experienced, and the physical and mental challenges he faced were all medically and psychologically consistent with someone who had endured such an ordeal. Dr. Susan Sinclair, the psychologist who worked with Ricky during his recovery, stated that his psychological profile was entirely consistent with someone who had experienced severe trauma and prolonged isolation. The specific nature of his post-traumatic stress symptoms, his survival-focused behavioral changes, and his detailed knowledge of Outback survival techniques all supported the authenticity of his experience. Perhaps the most compelling evidence was Ricky himself. The man who emerged from the hospital was fundamentally changed from the person who had disappeared months earlier. The trauma had left deep psychological scars that would take years to heal. He suffered from severe anxiety, depression, and flashbacks. His relationship with food and water became obsessive. He would hoard supplies and panic when resources seemed limited. Today, Ricky Megee lives quietly in Brisbane, working to rebuild his life after his incredible ordeal. He rarely gives interviews and prefers to keep his story private. The experience has left him with a profound appreciation for the basic necessities that most of us take for granted: clean water, regular meals, shelter, and human companionship. His story stands as one of the most remarkable survival accounts in modern history, a testament to the incredible resilience of the human spirit when faced with impossible odds. Whether you believe every detail of his account or not, one thing is undeniable: Ricky Megee endured something that would have killed most people, and he lived to tell about it. The story of Ricky Megee challenges everything we think we know about human limitations. It forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about what we would do in such desperate circumstances. Could you drink your own urine to survive? Could you eat insects and raw animals? Could you maintain your sanity through 71 days of complete isolation and hell on earth? What do you think about Ricky's incredible story? Do you believe he really survived those 71 days exactly as he described? Or do you think there are details missing from his account? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one and love hearing your perspectives on these amazing survival stories. If you found this story as fascinating and unbelievable as we did, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We bring you the most incredible true survival stories from around the world. And trust us, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Speaking of which, make sure you watch our next recommended video about the Brazilian man who survived 43 days, lost in the Amazon rainforest with nothing but a lighter and his wits. It's another story that will leave you questioning the limits of human endurance. Thank you for joining us for this incredible journey into one of the most extreme survival stories ever documented. Until next time, remember that the human spirit is capable of surviving almost anything when the will to live is strong enough.